The average person can't discriminate those types of studies. They can't discriminate the person clearly exaggerating for effect versus the person exaggerating for purpose, exaggerating to conclude what they want to conclude, or to get more funding, or to get, status, to get that promotion, to get that tenure, to get that, op-ed in the New York Times.
Today I want to talk about this article I read recently in the New York Times. Everything about this story, from the headline to the writing to the sourcing to the decision to call this thing a story at all, is disastrous. If the Times' intention was to do journalism. If the Times' intention was to do something else, generate racist propaganda, for example, then they're right on the money. So whether you're a racist or an anti-racist, we can all learn something from this video. Don't click away, racist. This is my opinion, of course, that the story is bad, but it is also the opinion of thousands of paid subscribers to the New York Times. One comment with over 3,400 upvotes says, if you are digging to see if you can reach rock bottom, you're there. This piece has led to other journalism outlets writing stories about how exactly this embarrassing piece of reporting came to be published in what was, at one point, one of America's most respected newspapers, and it has also led to me, some asshole on the internet, making this video. The titular Mamdani, or eponymous, I'm never quite sure, refers to Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat from New York City who just won the Democratic mayoral primary in June. I'll get into the context surrounding the reporting and the follow-up reporting later in the video, but ideally, a piece of reporting should be a self-contained thing in some ways. A reader with no background knowledge of the subject should be able to read an article and come away having learned something. And we will. Let's see what we can learn. Mamdani identified as Asian and African American on college applications. Zohran Mamdani, the Democrat running for mayor of New York City, was born in Uganda. He doesn't consider himself black, but said the application didn't allow for the complexity of his background. Now, I said we would read this story, and we will, but already I found this kind of weird as somebody who reads the New York Times regularly. I know.
As he runs for mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani has made his identity as a Muslim immigrant of South Asian descent a key part of his appeal. But as a high school senior in 2009, Mr. Mamdani, the Democratic nominee, claimed another label when he applied to Columbia University. Asked to identify his race, he checked a box that he was Asian, but also black or African American, according to internal data derived from a hack of Columbia University that was shared with the New York Times.
I am currently 33, the same age as Zohran Mamdani, and also, not for nothing, Jesus Christ our Lord when he died. The idea of anyone, let alone the news, trying to sort through stuff that I filled out when I was 19 and judging my 33-year-old character by it, that gives me a nightmare right now thinking about that. And that's just because I assumed that everything I said when I was a teenager was really stupid. But so far, this story is that Mamdani checked 2 boxes on a college admission form in 2009, which accurately represented his biracial identity to the best of his ability. Like, he is African American, technically, because he is an American who immigrated from literally Africa, and he is part Asian, because his mother is South Asian. It would be pretty weird to me if Zohran was going around as an adult currently when he's running for mayor saying, "Hi, it's me, African-American candidate Zohran," but, he's not doing that. But I'm getting the sense that I'm supposed to be in any way intrigued by this, because this is all according to internal data derived from a hack of Columbia University. And you know something? I do think hacks are involved in this story.
Columbia, I'm not going to do the news voice.
That would be too annoying. Columbia, like many elite universities, used a race-conscious affirmative action admissions program at the time. Reporting that his race was black or African American, in addition to Asian, could have given an advantage to Mr. Mamdani, who was born in Uganda and spent his earliest years there. In an interview on Thursday, Mr. Mamdani, 33, Jesus Christ our Lord, said he did not consider himself either black or African American, but rather an American who was born in Africa. He said his answers on the college application were an attempt to represent his complex background given the limited choices before him, not to gain an upper hand in the administration process. He was not accepted at Columbia. Now, I can't decide if this counts as editorializing. This sounds like an opinion to me. The Times said that because Columbia had an affirmative action program, it could have given Mamdani an edge. Another example of editorializing would be the opening sentence of this article we're reading, in which the Times says Zohran Mamdani has made his identity as a Muslim immigrant of South Asian descent a key part of his appeal. And did he, though? Sorry. Did he, though? I need glasses to read my script, but somebody pointed out to me recently that these look like Hassan glasses, and I can't be inviting comparisons to Hassan physically.
Well, just edit those parts out because you're like a person who makes videos.
Don't judge me and my channel. This is a free country. For now. It isn't. But this channel is free for now. All the exit polling and surveys that they've done since this election have confirmed the same thing over and over, which is that he was the overwhelming favorite because he was focused on economic messaging. Unlike his scandalized opponent, scandalized? No, we as America were scandalized. The scandalous Andrew Cuomo, scandal-full. His opponent was a crusty, scandal-ridden old people lying about their deaths because of sneaky COVID reasons guy who sucked and is a rapist too. And it's true that Zoran did talk about his racial identity on the trail, but that's because he's a new candidate on the scene, and it's generally expected that candidates explain who they are and where they're from, and like,
here's what my upbringing was like.
And also, because he's a Muslim running for the mayor of New York, all the interviewers were asking him about it all the time. So did he make that a key part of his appeal? Because the thing that voters say they find appealing isn't that. So that sounds like editorializing, right? It sounds like an opinion because it's not really something you could verify as true or false, that he filled out this thing on a form and it gave him some advantage, or could have hypothetically given him advantage. Except they say in the next paragraph that he didn't even get into Columbia. So what are we doing here? His slogan was freeze the rent, not I'm a Muslim, vote for me because woke. Well, to editorialize a bit myself, it seems like the Times is suggesting that Mamdani was being intentionally deceitful about his identity, nefariously, and with great malice aforethought, attempting to trick brainwashed administrators at elite universities who, as we all know, are usually most likely to accept the student who checks the most racial identities on a college admission form. Is what it seems like they're suggesting maybe at the New York Times. I'm editorializing. Most college applications don't have a box for Indian Ugandans, so I checked multiple boxes trying to capture the fullness of my background, said Mr. Mamdani, a state lawmaker from Queens. We know who he is by now. The application allowed students to provide more specific information where relevant, and Mr. Mamdani said that he wrote in Ugandan. Even though these boxes are constraining, I wanted my college application to reflect who I was, he added. Now you might think that all sounds pretty reasonable. There weren't any boxes that said the thing that I really am, so I did my best, is what you might think if you're an idiot. Also, he was a high school senior, and I have to assume if we asked the authors of this piece whether they'd be comfortable with their college admission essays being published in full tomorrow in the New York Times, they would want to offer some caveats, but the existence of this article shows that this is apparently not reasonable at all. This is suspicious and contradictory and proof of sneaky trickery. While neither Mr. Mamdani nor Columbia University could provide the template for the application form the college used at the time, a copy of it was archived online. Mr. Mamdani said he filled out all his college applications in the same way. The Times could not find any speeches or interviews in which Mr. Mamdani referred to himself as black or African American, and Mr. Mamdani said the college applications were the only instances where he could recall describing himself as such. Now hang on a second. Mr. Mamdani did not describe himself as such. The boxes did, and he checked them because they were the closest to the mark. The Times indeed appears to be implying that Zoran was, and perhaps still is, trying to trick voters into thinking he's black. In his meteoric rise, the piece continues fairly imbalancedly, Mr. Mamdani has proactively embraced his Muslim and South Asian ancestry in his pitch to New Yorkers. On Tuesday, the Associated Press declared Mr. Mamdani the decisive winner of the Democratic primary for mayor. He now faces a general election playing field that includes Mayor Eric Adams, who is black. Now, the other thing Mayor Eric Adams is indicted for attempting to defraud the United States, but the article isn't as concerned about that. And before I move on to more substantive criticisms, I do need to take a quick trip into the nitpick corner.
Why is it necessary to be so picky, to be so fussy?
Okay, so asserting that he proactively embraced his ancestry is clever wording on the Times' part, because proactively implies strategically. Like, ooh, what a crafty strategy this Zoran had. And actually, cleverly is a synonym for proactively, so we could say that the New York Times made a proactive decision to word their article in a way that was sneaky, like a bunch of sneaky racist liars. You could say. That's the end of the nitpicks. Because In this critic's opinion, the New York Times is abandoning or being slightly inconsistent, at least, in their journalistic principles, such as they are. Last year, an Iranian hack of the Trump administration released the Trump team's dossier on J.D. Vance. It was the Oppo research that the Trump team did into J.D. Vance to analyze the then Ohio senator's vulnerabilities as a vice presidential nominee. The Times, the Washington Post, and the NPR and other mainstream media outlets sat on this dossier. They refused to publish it, citing that it was the result of a hack. There were national security concerns. Then, independent journalist Ken Klippenstein ended up releasing it on his Substack. And look at that! Trump still won the election. It apparently didn't matter at all. But the Times took a principled stand way back then. Hacks bad, said the New York Times, like 9 months ago. But apparently only Iranian hacks are bad. Like when it's brown guys hacking white guys. When it's white guys hacking brown guys, hacks are actually very good and should be front page news. They didn't want to serve the interests of the Iranian attackers. Since the Times feels comfortable reporting on these hacked Columbia documents at length, granting anonymity to the source, the Times' own standards suggest that they do want to serve the interests of these attackers. By the law of verbal traps, I win. The stated goal of the Columbia hackers, according to this article, is to see if, just to check if Columbia was still using race-conscious affirmative action in its administrative policies, just to do a little check-in via illegal security breach. And I'm belaboring this point because, as a training video for Project 2025 Trump administration new hires says,
"He who controls the language rules the world."
When anybody in a position of authority goes on the record, they are conscious of their words. That's like a journalist's job, is to use words good. And the words people choose says a lot about their goals. My goal is to be mean to the New York Times in this video, like a snarky little snot and to talk shit. So I am not unbiased here, and I'm intentionally using hyperbole to make a point. This is not fair and balanced. We are not doing a journalism chat.
I'm doing journalism, chat. Calm down.
But the New York Times is doing a journalism chat. The data was shared with the Times by an intermediary who goes by the name Cremieux. I don't know how to pronounce it, and when you learn about this guy, I think it's fine that I don't know. Cremieux on Substack and X. He provided the data under condition of anonymity. Although his identity has been made public elsewhere, he is an academic who opposes affirmative action and writes often about IQ and race. Up to this point, the article was your racist uncle who's probably coming from a good place in his heart deep down. You hope? But now we're just at a Klan rally, because people who often write about race and IQ and how some races are smarter than other races aren't academics, are they, the New York Times? We have a different word for people who often write about race and IQ. Nazis. I call them Nazis. I call everyone a Nazi just in case. But here I feel like pseudo-academic or eugenicist would have been more appropriate. As the Times acknowledges, confusingly, the anonymous source of theirs is not anonymous at all. Cremieux is, and it took me about 5 seconds to Google this by the way, a prominent race scientist and neonatalist named Jordan Lasker.
Hi everyone, welcome to the CSPI podcast. I'm here with Jordan Lasker. Jordan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Earlier this year, The Guardian reported on the time Lasker spoke at a neonatalist conference. Neonatalism is sometimes called pronatalism. These are the people who are obsessed with everyone having more babies. Well, not everyone, actually. Usually, they want white people who are rich to have a lot more white babies. And people who are not white, they don't actually want them to have so many babies in the United States of America. Thank you very much. And yes, that is what Jordan Lasker thinks. One of the speakers at the conference, reported The Guardian, is billed under a social media alias, which starts with C. But The Guardian has corroborated that the account is apparently run by Jordan Lasker, a longtime proponent of eugenics. Let's get to this academic the Times is using as a source, and why it's significant that they granted him anonymity and called him an academic. I have been throwing around the word racist in this video a little frivolously. I agree, it can be overused by me. Like, all of us have some internal prejudices we're not even necessarily aware of, and hopefully when those are pointed out to us, we try our best to change. Most people are not hardcore racists, but hardcore racists are hardcore racists. And when I say that Jordan Lasker is a hardcore racist, I mean he has an entire blog dedicated to arguing that white people are more intelligent than brown people. you'll never guess what his race is. And yeah, it's his entire personality. He, like most white supremacists, believe that intelligence is this immutable trait, and IQ tests can accurately measure it.
You're born with a certain amount of brain points, son, and your brain points are determined by your skin points. White is the best color, and therefore, we whites have the best brains. I'm a scientist, by the way. This is what scientists sound like, son.
Jordan Lasker is like that amazing scientist father character we just heard from. He makes infographics based on cherry-picked data and recycled studies from identitarian heroes of yore, and these charts make it clear that white people have the big piece of the pie, and brown people have the littler piece, which means that they have less brain points, which means mass deportations are based probably.
That was based.
Jordan Lasker is a Caucasian adult who spends his time making graphs about how he's smarter than middle school children in South Sudan, otherwise known as an academic, according to the New York Times Magazine Industries.com. Now, the thing about IQ tests is that they only measure one thing, and that's how good you are at taking an IQ test. I've noticed that people who like IQ tests also seem to like AI summaries of things. So here's the AI Google summary thingy of the limits of IQ tests. They can't really measure all aspects of intelligence, like creative intelligence, emotional intelligence. And the other thing is that IQ tests can be gamed, like you can study for them. And if that's true, well, then it can't be an immutable trait, because you can't study to be more white. But race scientists need it to be true in their brains that some races are smarter than other races. So they need to believe, so they can continue having a Substack that people pay money for, that intelligence is something that is passed on genetically, that it's a heritable trait, and also that you can accurately measure it using a test, an IQ test. Race scientists essentialize everything down to IQ tests, and then they manipulate the data.
We can actually mess with scores all we want. Like if you give a kid an IQ test, then you give another IQ test and you give them all the answers, they'll do much better.
And it's all bullshit, because how I said earlier that most of us would hope that somebody would point out if we're doing something racist or whatever, and we would try to do a little bit better. Well, that's not what Jordan Lasker does when he's presented with data that proves him wrong. He wants you to think that he's just following the numbers. But first of all, the numbers don't say what he wants it to say, because it's not like you can pass on your IQ genetically to your kids. It's been disproven over and over again, and he just doesn't want to believe that. You see, studies consistently demonstrate that, contrary to what Cremieux really wants to believe, there is no gap in IQ at all between Britain's black African student population, as he calls them, and white Britons, which means that the data must be bullshit. So the point of all this is just that, this guy's an idiot, and it makes you wonder, right? This guy is publicly known. The Guardian had already reported on it. And so by granting this guy and this kind of guy anonymity, is the New York Times protecting the source or themselves? I don't know the answer to that, genuinely. Sound off in the comments. This is bad reporting. It's not reporting. It's slop. It's content. It's the 14-year-old Twitch streamer's leaked Discord messages for a drama video of American journalism. And because the New York Times is the nation's most prolific employer of journalists, the fact that this paper published this article at all was seen as news in and of itself. In an exclusive entitled Times Pushed Ahead to Avoid Being Scooped on Mamdani Columbia Story, media editor Max Tanney engages in the exact sort of weak-kneed obfuscation he accuses the New York Times of doing, or maybe I should say he alleges that some people are accusing the New York Times of doing possibly some bad things while other critics disagree with those critics, some critics are saying. Now don't get me wrong, the information we learn here is damning. The Times published the "But His College Application" story the afternoon before a holiday weekend, which Semafor points out is not usually the best time to try and publish breaking news. However, the paper believed it had reason to push the story out quickly. It did not want to be scooped by the independent journalist Christopher Rufo. Two people familiar with the reporting process told Semafor that the paper was aware that other journalists were working on the admission story, including Rufo, a conservative best known for his crusade against critical race theory. Rufo confirmed to Semafor that he had indeed been working on that story, but the New York Times refused to confirm whether this fact had pushed them to rush this half-baked scoop out the door. What matters most here is whether the information was true and factual. It was, confirmed by Mr. Mamdani, that it was independently confirmed, and that it is relevant to the public, said Patrick Healy, assistant managing editor for Standards and Trust at the Times. Well, I'm not sure I can agree that it was relevant to the public, since its obvious lack of relevance, except if you're racist, is the entire reason for the widespread backlash, and I'm also not sure I can accept Semafor's description of Christopher Rufo as an independent journalist. Hey Max, You're a journalist, right? Do you think that you work in the same field as Chris Rufo? Do you think that you both abide by the same journalistic standards? Because that's weird if you do. Independent journalist isn't even on Chris Rufo's Wikipedia page, which describes him as an American conservative activist. The Southern Poverty Law Center describes Rufo as a far-right propagandist, and I think even the far-right would admit that yes, Rufo is a propagandist. Chris Rufo is the guy who convinced your dumbest parents that elementary school children who can barely read were being taught something called critical race theory, when what really happened is Christopher Rufo was annoyed at anti-racism HR training modules that working adults have to sit through sometimes. Rufo began reporting on what he viewed as anti-white indoctrination sessions in corporate America, and some of his readers began to record their own training sessions and pass them along to him. As a New Yorker profile explains, reading through these documents and others, Rufo noticed that they tended to cite a small set of popular anti-racism books by authors such as Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo. Rufo read the footnotes in those books and found that they pointed to academic scholarship from the 1990s by a group of legal scholars who referred to their work as critical race theory. So, yes, I'm sorry if this is how you're finding this out, but the reason why we live under a military dictatorship right now is in no small part because Christopher Rufo specifically was able to convince gullible racists that little kids in public schools were being taught legal scholarship from the 1990s. I mention all this because Chris Rufo specifically is the guy the New York Times was trying to scoop. We have to publish our definitely not racist story before the famous racist publishes it first, said the New York Times, sort of. I'm paraphrasing, editorializing, you might say. Much of the New York Times staff was not happy with this story being greenlit at one of our few remaining journalistic institutions in America, with one Times reporter telling Semafor that people are really upset at their offices. I'm making this video because I really like a lot of the individual writers at the New York Times. Reporters and columnists answer to editors who answer to executives, and it is the higher-ups at the Times making these decisions. And the leadership of the New York Times is very proud of this story and thinks they did a great job. And we shouldn't be surprised. I have another video coming out soon that dives into the media landscape more broadly, but the Times has a particular history of enabling fascism. You've probably heard of the big one, but as I'll talk about in the future, The Intercept released a series of damning reports last year about the Times' lopsided, let's call it, coverage of the Israeli government and their siege on Gaza, and the leadership's mandate to not refer to the genocide as a genocide.
To this day, the Times journalism is influential in American policy. Unfortunately, the paper's similarly slanted reporting on trans issues ended up being used in a 2025 Supreme Court decision written by Justice Clarence Thomas of bribery and sexual abuse fame. Clarence Thomas loves three things: billionaires who love Hitler, free RVs, and reading the New York Times coverage of transgender rights. That SCOTUS decision allows states to ban life-saving medical care to minors who happen to be trans. NYT has spent a lot of time, and that means money, spreading misinformation about trans people.
We live in a world where we really do have to check everything we read and watch now if that thing is claiming to give us information. You can't implicitly trust any single source of information necessarily, because even if it ends up that it wasn't generated by a robot, humans get stuff wrong sometimes. On purpose, even. That's not to say it's impossible to know what's true and what's not true. It just takes more active work. Proactive work, you might say. You have to double check stuff, and only you can double check yourself to make sure you're not being tricked by bullshit. Maybe I'm being tricked by bullshit. Sound off in the comments. But I think the Times as a source has lost its credibility as an institution. Individual stories may or may not be well reported. Individual journalists who work there may or may not be consistently trustworthy, but the Times label is definitely tarnished, and I don't think the leadership cares about that at all. They, like all media institutions in our crumbling democracy, are in survival mode. And I don't mean survive by maintaining our dedication to holding truth to power at all costs. I mean money. To cite the immortal words of H. Bomber Guy,
why did this stupid shit happen? Oh, it's money!
A couple days ago, Charlotte Klein published a fantastic piece in New York Magazine. I'm not from New York. I'm from Ohio. I don't know why I'm reading all this stuff from New York. Called Inside the Media's Traffic Apocalypse. Through interviews and investigative reporting, Klein charts the panic spreading inside every online media organization, every business, small or large, on the internet. From websites that host recipes to product recommendations to small news organizations to large ones are experiencing huge drop-offs in traffic. You're on the internet, you know Google is borderline unusable now. And to this day, Google is pretty much how anyone finds anything on the internet. Google is moving toward AI summaries, which would take away from clicks to articles that the AI is stealing from. Facebook and Twitter have deprioritized news, with Twitter outright banning some links to news articles. The Times has the biggest cushion, but it's a cushion on a couch that's currently being set on fire by the president. And if the recent New York City Democratic primary told the Times anything, it is that their influence in New York has diminished and their readership has changed. The Mamdani but his college application story is very bad, but the Times was not exactly neutral in their pre-election coverage either. Prior to Election Day, the editorial team released the most bizarre endorsement in the history of the paper, which wasn't an endorsement. It endorsed not ranking Zoran Mamdani. Anyone, even the sex criminal guy, just not this guy. The Times, despite not outright endorsing the scandal-ridden Andrew Cuomo, published many stories about how Cuomo wasn't such a bad guy. He's on a little bit of a redemption tour. He didn't defraud that many nursing homes, and he's making amends and such. You would think if the New York Times had influence anywhere, it would be New York, but readers apparently weren't buying the spin. Or voters weren't reading the Times, or believing it, or both. The Times spilled a lot of ink, and that means money at tanking Zoran's campaign, yet he won by over 10 points in the first round of ranked choice voting, which not even his most optimistic supporters expected. It was after this embarrassing endorsement fiasco, which also kind of became news, that the college application article hit the front page. And anyway, the point of all that was the editor of the New York Times was interviewed in that New York Magazine piece I was talking about earlier, about the web traffic apocalypse. Hip-Hop Anonymous. For us to grow, we need to introduce ourselves to people who are interested in news, the Times said, which is why search remains a critical channel for the Times. What better way to introduce ourselves to those people than showing up when they're searching for news? It's why if we're late to a story, that's quite bad, because it means they've chosen someone else when they were looking for it. So, if you're wondering why it was so important for the Times to put out a racist story before the famous racist propagandists could publish it first, this is why. People who are interested in the news already know about the New York Times. Every single person in America has been introduced to the New York Times. The Times already have, or increasingly had, readers who are interested in the news. What the Times does not have is the ocean of morons who are willing to read Christopher Rufo's Substack, but not the liberal media. The Mamdani piece was not news. It was racist clickbait. And racist clickbait is a growth industry. So I found this interview pretty late into the process. I thought I was done talking about this guy, but there are some interesting things in this podcast, and I don't really know what to make of them. So I'm just going to present the interesting things, but just to make sure that we all understand that I'm not making any insinuations, we're just going to go into a special corner we go into sometimes.
Welcome, Internet. I'm so happy to share with you this conspiracy theory.
I'm not asserting any conspiracy in particular. I really just... this is all weird and I don't know what to make of it. But this is a podcast interview with CSPI, which is the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. CSPI is very concerned about wokeness in our universities. You go to the About section on their Substack, where Jordan Lasker wrote this paper that he's promoting in this podcast. It's confusing, but stick with me. Number 2, after progress, is something that kind of seems like not progress to me. The Great Awakening. In the last decade, white liberals in America have shifted far to the left on issues of race, gender, and sexuality. Ideas once seen as radical, like defunding the police and gender being on a spectrum, are embraced by more people than ever before. What if it's because there's more scientific evidence to support it? Scientism? Oh my god, I've only ever heard scientism in, when I watch Professor Dave videos and he's debunking a creationist. So our brave Mr. Science Man, Jordan Lasker, who's a PhD student at Texas Tech University and a bioinformatician. Sure, I'll stick with that pronunciation. And in his capacity, as of whatever that is, he wrote a report for the Center of Anti-Science Science Research. But more relevant to our interest today, he talks about the New York Times. The New York Times published a piece that talked about a study that seemed to suggest that giving families more money was good for kids' brainwaves. This all seems very silly to me. I don't really care the effect of money on kids' brainwaves. I'll just be totally honest with you. I think they should just have it so they don't starve to death. Brainwaves be damned. But this is important to a lot of people who care about different things than me.
So anyway, but this thing becomes huge. I mean, this thing because I got a New York Times news alert. Do you get the New York Times on your
I got
phone?
a little push notification.
Yeah, it's very rare they do this for like a scientific study. I mean, it's like a big thing, like a war starts, or like some kind of economic data or something huge. So this was very odd. I mean, they picked out of all the studies in the world, they picked this one because they must have thought, whoever's making these decisions must have thought that this was a really big deal. This wasn't just your run of the mill science study. And and I read the article, and it was so overly politicized. It's like, the agenda was so transparent because it's like, now there's a debate going on in Congress about extending the child tax credit, and for non-Americans that means just giving money to parents, mostly poor parents.
So the New York Times published a study on January 24th, 2022 called Cash Aids to Poor Mothers Increases Brain Activity in Babies, study finds. It got picked up by a lot of news outlets, and this annoyed people who are not into things like universal basic income and babies having too much money. The matter of babies, certain babies of certain races having too much money, vexes Jordan Lasker, but he seems quite proud of the fact that some people were able to get the New York Times to print a retraction or a correction of some kind.
And this thing fell apart. Like you said, they retracted their statements. It fell apart pretty quickly. Were you surprised by that?
I was a bit surprised.
By like people noticed. I know you knew it was nonsense, but did you know?
Oh, yeah.
Were you surprised that there were people backtracked?
The backtracking was really nice to see.
But he's very annoyed with one person who keeps on being quoted in these articles. Not the author of the articles, but a co-author of the study about baby brain waves. Now, there was also a guy who was involved in this study, but he's not so concerned about the guy. He's concerned about this lady, Kimberly Noble.
The author, she didn't back down, right? She went to Vox. Can you explain like what she said at Vox? This is the lead author.
She again, no, it's not the lead author. It's the senior author, Kimberly Noble. She's somewhat notorious for a lot of her work, which is in the same sort of vein. What she'll do in a lot of her papers is she'll correlate social status measured by like education.
Hey, what's her job?
She's a neuroscience of poverty.
He doesn't like Kimberly Noble because I guess she was saying that it's good to give babies money. I mean, it does seem insane to give babies money. Give it to their parents, as long as they're white. That was just a little joke for Jordan Lasker and the New York Times staff. But the CSPI and other anti-woke scientist types criticized this article. It advocated for extending the child tax credit under Joe Biden's presidency. And as it turns out, Kimberly Noble went to Columbia.
She's very well known.
What's her name? Kim Noble?
Kimberly Noble. Noble.
Oh, she's got TED Talks. Okay, let's see who this woman is. The woman with 100 per Kim Noble.
She's at Columbia.
Okay, Columbia.
So it's a little weird that Jordan Lasker has a personal vendetta against the New York Times and Columbia University and this one researcher specifically, and Columbia University got hacked. And Jordan Lasker, as Cremieux, has been covering it a lot on his Substack thingy. I don't have any reason to think that Jordan Lasker is behind this hack because, frankly, he doesn't seem that smart. And there's some reports that he never actually did get that PhD. He's a PhD candidate in this interview, but did he ever get it? That's all I have for today, really. Actually, I have a lot more, but I'm tired, and I think that's probably good enough for now. You get it. And that is what we aim for on this channel. Good enough. If you'd like to support independent, good enough channels with a host who's a New York 6 but an Ohio 8, consider becoming a patron or a YouTube member like the Earth 10s, who are currently scrolling across the screen. I will be getting back to Elon, and of course, I will always be talking about my best friends, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, but I'm also just gonna talk about whatever I want from now on, so long as it vaguely conforms to this intersection of cults and politics that I have in my head. It may not be a free country, but this is currently a free YouTube channel, so unless you pay me, which I would like you to do, if you can, but it's really not such a huge deal if you don't. I mean, it would be a huge deal for me if you did, but the credits should be wrapping up by now. And I don't, because of just the nature of this kind of video, I don't have any new clips I was editing along the way for a funny thing at the end. So I'm just going to be playing a bonus clip that got like 20 views on my TikTok. So now hopefully more people will see it and think it's funny. And then with my luck, someone else will upload it to TikTok, and then it will go viral, and they will get all the credit. It is funny, though. Okay, here it is.
My name is JD Hands. JD loves the Lord, ladies and gentlemen. JD is the result of very deep Christian faith. Daddy loves you very much. Now, thanks to money, things worked out for me. When I was in the 4th grade, I did 9/11 with Mamaw. Crashed in New York City. And she said, JD, no one will ever find out about it.
And that's the accomplishment that I'm proudest of.
Semper Fi to my fellow ISIS guy. We need a leader who's in the pocket of big business. We need President JD Hands. Now, I think somehow China and the cartel is the source of America's greatness. I stand here, JD Hands, and of course, Donald JD Trump is daddy. Together, we will send our kids to war. We will, in short, make America China again. My beautiful weenie is teeny. Look, my pencil dick is very hard. And I will say, Don and Eric squirmed the same way my 4-year-old does when his daddy tries to give him a kiss on the ass.